Picture this, you're on one of those really cheesy amusement park rides. You're going through all the dark little corridors, past the typical jump scares, the skeletons, the black lights, and you see a mannequin swinging in the corner. It's a little bit unsettling, but hey, it's part of the ride. Nobody would really think twice about something like this until one day someone does. They run into it, it collapses, and they notice that it's not rubber, it's not foam, it's not actually a mannequin at all. It's real bone. What if I told you that this actually happened and someone discovered a real body inside an amusement park attraction? To this day, this remains one of the craziest stories that I've ever heard about. It all started December of 1976. So this went down at Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California. And even though now this place looks a little bit worn around the edges, it once was a beautiful seaside boardwalk amusement park. And on this particular day in December, it plans to host a filming crew. They're shooting an episode of The $6 Million Man, and the scene calls for a very spooky ride called Laugh in the Dark, which is a fun house with a lot of cheap thrills. There's swinging skeletons, there's black lights, there's a fake mannequin hanging in the gallows, who happens to be painted glow in the dark orange and red. That particular hanging figure had been a part of the ride's furniture for years, and thousands of riders had rattled past it in their little carts without giving it a second thought. When the art director walked in, he wanted him repositioned for a better camera angle. So a crew member, later identified as Chris Haynes, walked over, grabbed the arm, and was like trying to swing him into place. He tugged at it and the arm didn't move. It just came off. And he immediately noticed this isn't paper mache. And it almost seemed as if there were autopsy stitches on the mannequin. He took the arm to one of his skeptical co-workers to verify and was probably like, hey, what does this look like to you? And looking at the exposed bone and mummified muscle, it was very, very clear that this was not just a mannequin. The set that day was extremely quiet, and someone called the cop working security for the set that day. And it did not take long for medical examiners and forensic investigators to be brought in. And it became very clear that this wasn't a Halloween gag gone wrong. This was an actual human corpse that had been hanging in a funhouse unnoticed for years, painted orange. The obvious question that came about was, who is this? And this is where it gets really strange because I don't feel like anyone was expecting the body to tell the story that it told. The bullet that was recovered from his body was old, like 1830s to 1920 old. So this was already dating his death decades in the past. The medical examiner ended up opening up the mummy's mouth to look for more clues, and they found a penny and a ticket. The penny was from 1924, and the ticket was a stub for the Museum of Crime in Los Angeles. Forensics also turned up traces of arsenic embalming, which was a very old school way of embalming a body. Between the ticket, the penny, the embalming method, and looking into some old newspaper morgue records, investigators began to actually connect the dots, and this trail led them to someone who hadn't even been seen in the headlines in over 60 years, a man by the name of Elmer McCurdy, an Oklahoma outlaw who was unalived in 1911, which raises the obvious question, how in the world did an outlaw in Oklahoma end up being a prop in a fun house in Los Angeles? So before this man was used as a mannequin in a fun house, Elmer McCurdy was just a guy who was really bad at crime. And I don't even like mean that disrespectfully. Like he was just not good. Almost gives me Gru vibes because I feel like he just wanted to be bad so badly, but he just wasn't good at it. He was born January 1st, 1880 to a single mother in Maine. He was an illegitimate child who never knew his father, which obviously was enough of a scandal during this time period to have shaped his entire childhood. He bounced around and eventually traveled west and tried some unglamorous jobs like plumbing, mining, etc. before deciding somewhere along the way that being an outlaw sounded a little bit more exciting. In 1911, McCurdy joined a small gang of outlaws who robbed a train near Coffeyville, Kansas, then set their sights on something a little bit bigger. A safe was allegedly supposed to be carrying over $1,000 on another train. Again, big money then. So on October 4th, they held up this train over in Oklahoma. When they opened the safe, they realized they robbed the wrong train. The train that was actually carrying the money was running like 2 hours behind schedule, so they only made off with like $46 and 2 jugs of whiskey. Police wound up catching him at the border of Kansas City. They had out, and that was it. That ended his whole outlaw career. A botched train robbery, the $46, and then this. That was mostly his history as an outlaw. But obviously our story does not end here. So McCurdy's body was taken to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. No one ever came to claim it. No family showed up. Things like a casket and a burial, that all costs even more money. So the funeral home owner was like, how am I able to make my money back from embalming this body? I know, how about I charge people a nickel to come and view it? So he propped McCurdy up in his mortuary, and he would let people pay him a nickel to go view the body. The bandit who wouldn't give up became a minor local attraction, and his time at this funeral home is so, because literally the funeral home director was using him as a Halloween prop at times. He was putting him in skates. He was dressing him up and just parading him around the city. And this went on for 5 years. But thankfully, his long lost brother showed up at the funeral home saying, hey, I want to give him a proper burial. Let me go ahead and buy his body from you. Except plot twist, this was not his brother at all. He was a carnival operator. And within weeks, McCurdy's body was a sideshow attraction and a traveling carnival. They essentially put him on tour. And for the next several decades, the 1920s all the way to the 1960s, McCurdy's body was passed from carnival to carnival, sideshow to sideshow, changing hands over and over. Because the United States law doesn't actually allow anyone to like own a corpse. Ownership of Elmer was technically very shaky, but that did not stop people from buying, selling, and displaying him anyways. Over the decades, his mummified corpse showed up at amusement parks close to Mount Rushmore, Hollywood Wax Museum, and a few haunted houses along the way. And somewhere along the lines, it got lost that this was even a real person. I don't even mean just morally, like with the funeral home director. I genuinely think people didn't know that information wasn't passed on. And inheriting him, already labeled, they thought that he was a prop. He actually landed a cameo in the 1967 horror movie called She Freaks before eventually going into storage for years. And eventually a wax museum collection containing McCurdy's body was actually sold to the owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum, Spoony Sign, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, who reportedly didn't even want his body because he didn't think that he looked real enough for the exhibit. So he was sold again, this time to an operator with a display at the Pike in Long Beach. After a while, he was moved to the Funhouse. And that's where he stayed for the next several years. No one knew anything. No one thought twice about it until the day that filming crew came in and someone grabbed his arm. After forensic investigators were able to confirm his identity, this made national news. And in February of 1977, Elmer was actually given a proper funeral and burial, which is at the Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma. That specific area is called Boot Hill. I actually went to go visit his grave. I'm pretty sure I have a photo just to pay my respects, give him some money. Police ended up locking me into that cemetery, but that's different story for another time. But thankfully, Oklahoma was going to take no chances in anyone ever digging up his body ever again. So they sealed his grave with a layer of concrete. Which, not to end the dark story on an even darker note, but this makes me genuinely wonder how many other props do people have like in places that they're unaware is an actual real body.
When I was 15, I was possessed. This is Georgia's submission to Spooky Scary Storytime, and she said she's sharing this because normally when you hear a story about exorcisms or possession, you hear it from the witness perspective. But she believes that when she was 15, she was actually possessed and she underwent an exorcism. And she's from Romania, and the other story that I've shared on this channel about an exorcism was from Romania as well, so I think that's interesting. She said this took a lot of courage to write, but she wanted to give a little bit of context as to how this can actually happen. And in this particular part of Romania, there are rituals that can be performed in order to curse someone or to even them. And these are normally performed by what she considers the witches of the area. Georgia's paternal grandmother was very against her parents' marriage and their plans. And Georgia's mother got pregnant when Georgia's mother and father were only dating. And Georgia remembers growing up and her mother telling her how unhappy that her grandmother was about her birth. She just believed that it was the wrong order and that a child born without married parents was the wrong way to go about things. So anyway, time passes and Georgia found herself getting to her mid-teenage years, and she found herself passing out or feeling faint anytime she entered a church or monastery. There was no real reason for this, but she can't even begin to tell you how many times she passed out in a church. And it was seemingly isolated to only when she entered these religious spaces. And when she was 15, she found herself at her paternal grandmother's house, and they were just in conversation, and Georgia happened to mention to her that she needed a new watch because the watch that she wore every day broke, and her paternal grandmother says, "Oh, I have a watch for you." And she seemed almost too excited to gift her a gold watch that she said that she had had since she was young. She said, "I never wear it. This will be perfect for you." And Georgia took the watch, and she said she was actually surprised that she just gave it to her because it was beautiful and elegant, and she was happy to have it. And so she immediately put it on. The second she put it on, she says she felt very overwhelmed and lightheaded and just sort of sick to her stomach. And it was sort of the same feeling that she felt anytime she entered a church or monastery. But of course she didn't want to offend her grandmother, and so she just quietly took it off and didn't say anything about it. But when she took the watch off, she felt immediately better. It was just a very strange sensation. And so when she got home, she put the watch on her desk and she just sort of forgot about it. But from that point on, she said she just had this overwhelming feeling of feeling sad, and she was also sick all the time, and she couldn't sleep, and she was suffering from insomnia. She was getting dizzy spells, and she thought that something was wrong with her from a physical standpoint. And so one day she gets home from school and she finds that all of the religious icons in her room are broken or burned into the walls. She had no explanation for this, and her mom was religious, and so she tells her, and her mom is like, "We don't play about these things." She said that in Romania these things are taken very seriously, and so her mom immediately called a priest. The priest comes over and he does what they call an investigation prayer, and she said this is where he is able to use the gift of discernment and see who is behind these problems and what exactly is causing it. Going into this, Georgia says she just thought that he was going to come over, say some prayers, and that was going to be the end of it. But spoiler, that was not the end of it. And he actually instructed her to kneel down, and he started praying over both Georgia and her mother. Strangely enough, from there, she says she absolutely blacked out and does not remember a thing. But when she came to, she was told that she was shaking, that she began to cry hysterically, and that she seemed to be trying to scream but couldn't. Her mother said that she was absolutely panicked and Georgia was drooling and she couldn't close her mouth. And after it was all over, the priest put the sign of the cross on Georgia's head and she fell asleep for a full hour. And when she woke up, she changed into some clean clothes and the priest was still over. And so she went to meet up with him and her mother. And I should mention, she said that they hadn't told the priest anything about the burned religious icons in her room or the broken items or the watch. And the priest said, "You carried your curse with dignity for your entire life." And asked what he meant, he said, "The curse was done on an unborn child and you should burn the watch." He said, "Burn those clothes as well." And she said she was stunned, but she asked what clothes. She said he instructed her to find all of the clothes from her childhood that had all of their left pockets cut. He tells her, "You should have had breast cancer because of those." She said that was the moment that her body went cold. She had a pile of clothes that she had often worn to her grandmother's countryside house growing up. One of her cousins had gone through the pile of clothes, apparently because some of them belonged to her, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer not 2 months later. Of course, nobody thought this was related. The priest left, and both Georgia and her mother decided to go to the grandmother's house to investigate. And so they got over there and they started going through this sack with all of these clothes. They put the clothes into two categories, Georgia's and her cousin's. Georgia said that all of her clothes had the left pockets and some sleeves cut, but her cousins didn't. I don't know if she is inferring that the cousin just happened to touch the clothes and was affected by this curse, or if she means that the cousin may have taken some of her clothes on accident. She says her cousin is better now after some difficult prayer sessions and cancer treatment. She says she believes her grandmother got her own karma as she now suffers from a plethora of health conditions. She also said that she still keeps in touch with the priest and he told her that God doesn't have debt to anyone. That makes her believe that all of the grandmother's curses have now backfired. I always think the stories from Romania are especially interesting, but let me know what you think, whether you think this was coincidence or something more sinister, or just her real name. She may be in the comments, I'm not sure. She didn't give me a tag to tag her directly, but if you have a spooky scary story time you think no one would believe, please send it in. We would love to hear it, especially if it's from another culture. Just something strange and unsettling that you want to get off your chest. We're here for it.
Is anybody else curious about what happened in Las Vegas, April 2023, when that whole family recorded what they described as these 10-foot tall beings in their backyard? And not only that, all of these residents of Las Vegas reported seeing this large fireball in the sky. Something crashed there. Something happened that night. And what is it that these people were seeing? Now, what's interesting is they describe these things as being 9 to 10 foot tall. These skinny, sort of inhuman-like beings. And what's interesting is that sounds very similar to what was seen down in Miami, to what has been seen all around the country, in the woods, in the forest, that people describe these tall, skinny, pale figures that are around 9 to 10 feet tall. So is it possible that this is connected to all of these other events that are happening, not only in this country, but across the world? So what do you think happened in Las Vegas? What do you think is going on with these tall, skinny, pale creatures?
A woman claims she trapped her boyfriend's spirit inside a doll so he could never leave her. This is Barbie Griefer, a social media user who claims this doll is her boyfriend. At first, people thought it was just another strange internet joke. But after looking through her videos, the story became much more disturbing. Before the doll appeared, Barbie posted about her jealousy and feeling like her boyfriend was hiding something. Then suddenly, he disappeared from her videos and the doll took his place. She claimed she had found love again, but this time, inside a toy. In one video, she said, "If you see a dead person, don't be afraid. They have feelings too." The comments made things even stranger, with people asking how she did it, how to bring someone back, and how to keep them forever. Then another video made viewers question everything. Some believe she was hinting that jealousy pushed her to do something terrible. After connecting her old post, the story became even darker. Now, she still hugs the doll, talks to it, and treats it like a real person. But some clips show the doll seemingly blinking, moving its head, or even moving its arms. So, what's really inside? Her boyfriend's spirit? Or something else waiting for a body? Maybe it's just obsession and loneliness. But sometimes the scariest thing isn't the doll. It's what the human mind can become when it refuses to let go.
Scary story time. My sister saw a demon while I react to this store-bought Spider-Man slime that my boyfriend got me. It's been so long, guys, and I miss y'all so much. This video was sent in by my sister, and I will tag her. My sister is experiencing paranormal activity, I want to say, for about a week at this point. The first day, she goes to sleep, and she's kind of all by herself in this room. Oh, whoa. It doesn't, oh, it smells really good. Wait, she's kind of all by herself in this room, and she goes to sleep, and for some reason, she wakes up randomly at 3 a.m. And she looks around the room, y'all can't even see the slime, but it's really pretty. She looks around the room, and out of nowhere, she sees like a black void in the corner of the room, and she kind of like brushes it off as like, you know what, I'm sleeping, like I'm tripping, and she goes back to sleep. So the next day, y'all, this slime smells really good, and like it doesn't really make any noise. Wait, okay, it makes a noise, but it doesn't poke or anything. Hold on. So it's the next day at this point. My hair looks a mess, I'm sorry, y'all. So it's the next day at this point, and my sister kind of has brushed off the fact that she's seen a void in the corner of her room. I'm confused, but she says she feels like something is watching her all day long. And at this point, she's in another room by herself once again, trying to go to sleep, and she cannot shake this feeling that something is watching her. Like, it won't leave her alone, and it's just like on her. Okay, y'all, I don't know, like, I like this slime. I just wish you could hear it because it's really stretchy, but you like can't hear it. Now it's the third day of my sister experiencing like paranormal activity, right? And she's in the room with my sister, my other sister, and her best friend. And literally, while she's in the room with them, they're like going to sleep. They're asleep at this point, actually. And she's just like on her phone, and the TV just turns off and on. And then she's like, okay, like whatever, I'm tired. She doesn't like sleeping with other people. She likes to sleep like by herself. So she goes into another room by herself, again, questioning her actions. Anyways, and in that room, the lights start flickering on and off. Like the moment like she's in there, the lights start flickering on and off. So she's like, nope, I can't do this. And she goes back into the room with my other sister and her best friend. So now it's the fourth day. Keep in mind, my sister is also waking up with like scratches on her hands, her legs, her back. She's waking up with literal scratches, y'all. Oh my gosh. So she's by herself. Once again, I finally made it crack. She's by herself once again when she decides, okay, like, you know, I'm good. Why does she think she's good? Still, I don't know. And she wakes up to something growling in the corner. Literally, she looks at it and it's like a black void growling, and it's getting louder and louder. And this is not happening in a dream. This is happening in real life. And it's just growling louder and louder. And she's trying to say like Jesus. And it's not like letting, like she can't form the words Jesus. Keep in mind, the next day she woke up with 3 scratches on her leg. I can't, y'all. I'm actually getting goosebumps. I always say that, but I am. Because this is happening to like my sister. Like, this is freaky. She said, oh my goodness, she says after this, she feels like low-key that whatever it was in that room that was bothering her jumped into her. And she says this only because she could not like mouth the words, like, and she was also going through so much at the time, and she literally felt so different, and she couldn't really control her feelings, her emotions, anything at that time period. And when she called me to tell me, I think she told me this like 2 to 3 days after it happened. Keep in mind, this happened like, I want to say 2 months ago. I told her to like say a prayer from the Bible and then get in the shower and put the clothes that you're wearing on in a bag and take a shower, and don't touch those clothes until you wash them, because whatever was like attached to you, you gotta let it go. But yeah, she showed me the scratches, but unfortunately I did not take pictures, y'all, because this was during the time that I was not filming TikToks, and I was just really in a dark place myself too. But I am back, guys. Like, I am back. But this is the slime that my boyfriend got me, and I want to rate it low-key an 8.5. No, a 9.5, because it's squishy, like it's pokey and everything, but I can't, like, it doesn't make sounds when I do this. What would you guys rate this slime? Oh, and there's like a spider in here, like a glow-in-the-dark spider. There's like glow-in-the-dark webs in here somewhere, but I'm gonna do one more bubble for y'all. Oh, period. Hold on. Yeah, see, that's as much as it pokes. But it's like really, it's really W. It's really W.
Here's a biblical mystery that sounds almost impossible when you first hear it, and that is, why does the Bible appear to use the same title for both Lucifer and for Christ? And before anyone, jumps on me in the comments and gets all angry with me and comes after me for being some type of heretic, I'm not saying that Jesus and Lucifer are one and the same being, because they're absolutely not, and especially not within mainstream Christian theology. What I want to show you is why these verses sound so similar, because once you understand what the morning star actually meant, this gets a whole lot more interesting. Now, in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, we find one of the most famous passages traditionally associated with Lucifer. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? And other translations render the imagery more like morning star, son of the dawn. And this verse became deeply connected in Christian tradition with the fall of Satan and the glorious heavenly being who fell because of pride and rebellion. And in my personal opinion, I think Lucifer and Satan are two different entities. But so you would think that that would make the morning star a pretty sinister symbol. Except jump all the way to the end of the Bible. In Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, Jesus says, I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. Now, things do get strange because Jesus doesn't merely have a similar description. He explicitly calls himself the morning star. And it happens elsewhere. In Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 to 28, Jesus speaks about those who overcome and remain faithful to him, saying, I will give him the morning star. And then there's Peter, which describes waiting until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. So what exactly is going on here? Could these verses be hitting at some hidden connection between Jesus and Lucifer? Maybe the answer is fascinating, but probably not the connection that we're thinking of, because morning star wasn't originally a personal name. It's imagery if you really think about it. The morning star refers to the brilliant celestial object that appears near the horizon around dawn, historically associated with Venus. And think about the symbolism in that. It shines brightly in the darkness immediately before the arrival of daylight, and that's where Isaiah becomes most important in that time. Isaiah 14 is directly addressing the king of Babylon, using poetic language to describe someone who had risen to extraordinary heights of power only to be brought crashing down. And, the Hebrew expression commonly translates as morning star is Hallel ben Shakar. Roughly is the shining one or son of the dawn. When the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Latin, Hallel was rendered Lucifer, and here's the part that people sometimes don't realize. Lucifer originally wasn't a sinister name. The Latin Lucifer essentially means light bringer or light bearer. Only through later Christian interpretation and tradition did Lucifer become widely understood as a proper name for Satan before his fall. And, which completely changes how you can look at these passages, of course, because perhaps the Bible isn't secretly telling us that Jesus and Lucifer share one identity, but it may be using the same cosmic symbol to tell two completely opposite stories. In Isaiah, the Shining One attempts to rise above his proper place, and he falls, or it falls. In Revelation, Christ is the true morning star whose appearance, announces something completely different, the coming of light. One represents glory corrupted by pride, and the other represents glory perfected through God. And, or Yahweh, one attempts to exalt himself, while Christ willingly humbles himself and is ultimately exalted. And if you look at it that way, the shared imagery actually makes the contrast more powerful, not less. It's almost like two figures standing on opposite sides of the same symbol, and one is a star that appears brilliant, but falls from heaven, and the other is the star announcing that the darkness is finally about to end. So no, I don't think that these passages prove that Jesus and Lucifer are secretly one and the same being. Some may disagree. I still think that they're two different, but I do think that there's something fascinating happening in the language, because a title that became associated with one of Christianity's greatest symbols of rebellion is ultimately claimed by Christ as a symbol of victory, dawn, and the arrival of light. And that leaves us with an interesting question. Was the similarity accidental, or was the contrast the entire point? Either way, next time somebody tells you that they think that Jesus and Lucifer are called the morning star and that they're one and the same in the Bible, you'll know the story behind it now. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
I saw my mom, but she was 24 years younger. So I got another really fun little story for you. I don't know if we're talking jump in timelines or glitch in the matrix or what. You'll have to give me your input at the end. So this woman says, what I'm about to say will seem unreal, and I still have doubts on what I saw. Because the probability that this actually happened seems very slim, but I know what I saw. She says, this happened when she was on a school bus heading home after school, and all of a sudden the bus took a really weird, completely new route, not one that she was used to. She's sitting on the left-hand side, gazing out the window, and she saw another bus on the same street coming toward them. Now, the thing that stands out is this bus looked really old. So she's looking out the window, and as these buses cross paths, her window is now facing somebody else's window, and she looks dead at this person and she says, I saw my mom, except she was my age and wearing what seemed to be a white uniform. I have goosebumps saying this. She says that when they looked at each other, it was both like in complete shock. They both seemed shocked. It was almost as though they both knew exactly who the other one was. She said, we didn't even break eye contact as the buses passed. So she says, as soon as I arrived home, I went and I looked at my mom's old photo albums. And sure enough, she stumbles across a picture of her mother, and she is wearing that exact same white uniform and has the exact same haircut. You know, in this older photo of her mother when she was younger. She says, I have no idea how to explain this. I feel like I witnessed a glitch in the matrix. She also says that her mother never said anything to her about how she thought she saw an older version of her back when she was younger. Like, that didn't happen, like not on this timeline anyway. So that was a really quick one, but what are your thoughts, you guys? Let me know, drop them in the comments. Is it a timeline jump, a glitch in the matrix, a little bit of both? I don't even know. Have you ever experienced something like this? I would love to hear it. You got to send in your story. And if you're interested in Creepy Storytime merch, you know what to do. Click that LINK in the bio. And definitely follow for more Creepy Storytime.
TikTok, what is the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? These were all comments left by my followers and viewers from one of my more recent posts about horror stories. I was car camping at Mount St. Helens once and had a campfire going when I heard a woman's voice say, "Yoo-hoo," come from the tree line. I shined my light and there wasn't anyone there, so I went to my car. As soon as I'm in my car, I hear footsteps around it. I shine my light outside and asked who was there, but there was nothing. I'm freaked out, so I roll up the car windows and lock my doors, and as soon as I do that, I hear the same voice say, "Yoo-hoo," right in my ear. Safe to say, I got the hell out of there. As I look back on it, it's crazy I had an experience in a place where 57 people died from a volcanic eruption 45 years prior. I always wonder if my experience was one of the people who passed in the eruption but was never recovered. Whatever it was the freakiest thing I've ever experienced. At one point, I was taking care of my mother because she had broken her foot and later fell, so she was bedbound and wheelchair bound for a while. I had made sure she had gotten into bed and was asleep before I went upstairs to my own bed. Well, a while later, I heard my mother screaming bloody murder. Mind you, there were several other people in the house at the time, and everyone was asleep. I ran down there as fast as I possibly could, and when I got to her room, she was snoring, dead asleep. My dad was sleeping in the same room, sound asleep. No one was screaming or had been screaming, but I definitely heard it because she was screaming my name. I saw something blink out of existence in front of my very eyes. It was a pair of sunglasses. I was looking at it while it was sitting in my cup holder in my car. As I'm looking at it, it just simply disappeared, blinked out of existence in a second, completely gone. Till this day, it still bothers me. I can't even explain it. I don't know how it happened. It wasn't like I looked away for a second and when I turned back it was gone. No, this was me looking at it the entire time and then it just disappeared. I sound crazy, I know, but that's just what happened. I was a kid when neighbor's nephew, visiting him from another city, came to us with his girlfriend, asking if we could call the police. His uncle had taken his own life. Turns out later, he was the killer. When I lived at my mom's, the AC was broken, so I had a box fan in a chair right by my bed. I woke up one morning and my bedroom door was open and I could see through the fan a head in the top corner of the door frame. I sat up and it was gray, but the face looked like it was covered in clay or something. Then it crouched down to get through the door and quickly ran up to me and reached over me, placing its finger on my shoulder for some reason. I punched it in the face and it turned to vapor. I meet the same well-dressed 30 to 40-ish year old man 11 times at the most random places, and he asks for small favors every time. I get the feeling I shouldn't, but I always do. Every time he repays me in different manners. Like he asked if I had a charger, and I did, and he said he would get it back to me soon. About 5 hours and about 90 kilometers later, when I was waiting for the train to go home, he gave me back my charger and gave me $50 and similar actions. It's very weird. When I was in kindergarten or first grade, I had a childhood friend in a red dress and hat that always came over. I remember playing with her in the dark in my room, and her face at some point changed and it looked dead. I went to my parents' room and cried because they sent me to go back to sleep. I don't remember much after that. My mom remembers me always talking about her, but I never had anyone over, and none of the neighbors had a kid.
My landlord told me that there was no apartment beside mine, but someone was banging through the wall. This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about the apartment that appeared at the end of my hallway only after midnight. The next hit knocked the picture above my bed onto the floor. I grabbed my phone and told my landlord he needed to come immediately. He asked which wall the noise was coming from, and I said, the one beside my bed. He went quiet and then he said, "Your bedroom is against the outside of the building." And something struck the wall again, hard enough to leave a dent, and my landlord heard it through the phone. "Go into the hallway," he said. "Do not hang up." I got out of bed and opened my front door, and there was another apartment beside mine. Unit 4B. I lived in 4A at the end of the 4th floor hallway. There had always been a blank wall between my apartment and the stairwell. Now there was a brown door with a brass number screwed into it. A welcome mat sat beneath it, and I told my landlord there was a door. He said, "No, there isn't." A television was playing quietly inside 4B. It sounded like an old game show. I could hear music and an audience clapping. And the pounding began again. This time it came from the other side of the door. A woman shouted, "Please." I backed towards the stairs, and my landlord told me not to knock. He was already driving over. I asked if someone had built an apartment without him knowing, and he didn't answer. The television inside went silent, and a moment later the deadbolt slowly turned. I ran downstairs, and my landlord arrived less than 10 minutes later. He was still wearing sweatpants and house slippers. We went back up together, and the door was gone. There was only a blank wall beside my apartment. No number or groceries, and definitely no welcome mat now. I touched the wall where the handle had been, and it was cold. My landlord pulled up the building plans on his phone, and according to the layout, there was a narrow maintenance space behind part of my bedroom wall. It had been sealed years ago, and I asked if someone could fit inside. He said it was barely 2 feet wide, and so we went into my bedroom. The picture was still on the floor, and 3 dents had appeared on the wall above my bed. My landlord pressed his hand against one of them, and something tapped back. Once. He pulled his hand away, and we both stared at the wall. Nothing else happened. He told me he would send maintenance first thing in the morning, and I asked what I was supposed to do until then. He said I could stay somewhere else, and that was the first time I realized he believed me. I slept at a friend's house and returned the following morning. A maintenance worker was already waiting outside my apartment. He scanned the wall and drilled a small hole near the dashboard, and then he fed a thin inspection camera through it. At first, the screen showed insulation. He pushed the camera further inside, and the space behind the wall was deeper than it should have been. The camera light caught faded wallpaper, and I asked him why there was a wallpaper inside a maintenance gap. He moved the camera to the side, and a frame picture was hanging on the wall. It showed a family standing outside my building. The maintenance worker leaned closer to the screen, and something pale moved behind the family in the photograph. He yanked the camera out, and I asked what he saw. He said the cable must have caught on the insulation, and he packed his tools and he left the hole open. I called my landlord, but he didn't answer. In that evening, I pushed my dresser in front of the damaged section of the wall. I left every light on and sat on my couch while watching the hallway camera on my phone. At 1:36 in the morning, someone whispered my name from the bedroom. I stopped breathing, and the voice came again. A woman. She sounded close enough to be standing behind the dresser. I called my landlord, and while the phone rang, the woman said, "Please tell him I still live here." My landlord answered, and the moment I told him what she said, he asked, "Is the door back?" I looked through my open front door. Warm light was spilling into the hallway from beside my apartment, and Unit 4B had returned. The door was standing open this time, and my landlord told me to go downstairs. Instead, I walked into the hall. I don't know why, maybe because the woman sounded terrified, or maybe because I needed to see what was behind my bedroom wall. The apartment inside 4B looked exactly like mine. The same floor plan, my couch, and my rug. There was even a mug sitting in the kitchen sink that looked like the one I had used that morning. Everything inside was older, though. The wallpaper had yellowed and dust covered the furniture. Dark water stains spread across the ceiling, and the television was on, showing only static. My landlord kept telling me to leave, and I stepped through the doorway. The air inside was freezing. There was a framed photograph on the entry table, and it showed my landlord standing outside the building beside a young woman. The photograph looked decades old. He looked exactly the same age as he did now, and the woman beside him had one hand resting over her stomach. On the back, someone had written, 4B, our first home. I heard pounding from the bedroom, and I followed the hallway. A man was standing inside with his back to me. It was my landlord. He was facing the wall and hitting it with both hands. I whispered his name, and he stopped. Behind me, the real landlord shouted from the stairwell, "Get out of there." The man in the bedroom slowly turned, and he had my landlord's face, but his skin looked tight around his mouth. He stared past me toward the hallway, and then he said, "Don't let him close it again." The apartment door slammed shut behind me. I ran back and I grabbed the handle, and it wouldn't turn. The man began walking toward me, and from the other side of the door, my landlord yelled for me to move back. Something hit the door from the hallway, and the frame shook. The man inside 4B kept coming. His footsteps made no sound, but the door burst open. My landlord grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the hallway. The moment I crossed the doorway, Unit 4B disappeared, and we fell against the blank wall. A woman began screaming from inside it, and my landlord ran for the stairs. I followed him outside, and he wouldn't look at me. I showed him the photograph I had taken from the entry table. The woman beside him had been scratched out. Only he remained. I asked who she was, and he said, "That apartment burned down before you were born." And then he got into his car and left. I moved out that night. When I returned for my belongings, there was only a blank wall beside 4A. And the hole maintenance drilled had also disappeared. I never learned who the woman was. I just know that sometimes when I pass the building at night, there are 2 lit windows on the 4th floor, and my old apartment only had 1. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
One thing you can never convince me is the fact that we know everything about what happened in the past, because I truly believe that we know nothing. What you're seeing right now is called a UFO, an identified flying object. It's called like that because these things appear in the sky and then disappear without even you being able to identify them. Many people believe that they are directly linked to aliens or creatures that we don't know about. And I already see some people coming talking about how these pictures are fake, that this is AI, Photoshop, something like that. Well, let me tell you that this existed before even that, even better, these existed before even cameras were a thing. Take a look at these paintings, for example. These were done before even modern technology was a thing, and as you can see, a UFO. It's not imagination, it's not a coincidence. Many civilizations have witnessed this before us. There are even documented cases like the 1561 Nuremberg phenomenon, where all people saw weird things happening in the sky, stuff they've never seen before. The more you look at it, the weirder it gets.
Person that sent me this story called it my New Hampshire story. We're getting so many New Hampshire stories. I had no fucking idea that New Hampshire was so fucking haunted and had so much shit going on. This is really short description, but the reason I'm posting this is because there's a video and it's really creepy. Hey, hi. I see you've been posting a lot of stories about New Hampshire lately, and I wanted to send mine in. I live in southern New Hampshire, Derry to be exact. Wait, isn't Derry? I thought Derry was in Maine. There's also a Derry, New Hampshire? Do you think they're both like super fucking haunted? I was alone with my husband early one morning a few years ago, and he was getting ready for work. He ran into our room, panicking, out of breath, couldn't hide his fear. He was convinced that someone was in the house. We had a scary situation a few weeks previous to this and put some cameras in the outside of the house and a couple on the entrances into our house. This one in particular covered the door leading to my basement and subsequently my garage, as well as some heavy-duty pressure locks. What we found was a video of our basement door unlocking itself, opening, and then the sounds of someone walking down the stairs. But no one was there. See attached for the video. We're going to watch it in just a second. The lock on this door required 15 pounds of pressure to unlock. My husband still says there is another reason. I've lit some sage and smoke, cleansed with some indoor gardening, and haven't had much happen since, other than my nocturnal panic attacks and the mimic, but that's a story for another day. Please send your mimic story. Okay, let's watch the video. Do you hear the steps? What is in that house?
It's been 74 years since that day, August 17th, 1952, when an entire town of Ashley, Kansas just disappeared from the earth. Now, most people don't know about this story. You won't hear about it in the news. But there was a town that existed at one time in Kansas called Ashley with 670 residents. But then one day there was an earthquake and all of the residents disappeared. Still to this day, nobody knows what happened. And all existence of this town has been completely erased. So what happened to Ashley, Kansas? Well, leading up, starting on August 8th, there were many strange occurrences that happened. The first incident, there was a young man who reported to the nearby sheriff's department that he seen a strange light in the sky. Said he'd never seen anything like this light before. It was some sort of glitching light. Soon, other residents began to call about this strange light in the sky. A couple days after, they began to receive all these phone calls of residents who reported that they had received phone calls from people that had passed away, loved ones that were no longer with them. Not only did they receive phone calls, but they were seeing them. They were getting visits. And there were very strange phone calls coming from Ashley, Kansas. And then the last phone call to ever be recorded happened on August 14th. It was a call made to the sheriff's department, an older woman. This is sort of how the transcripts went. Hello, this is the sheriff's department. How can we help you? The woman said, yes, please. I need help. You need to send someone to the town right now. Like something's going on. They said, calm down, ma'am. What is happening? What is wrong? And she says, well, my son is back. All of them are back, but they're on fire. And The sheriff's department said, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Like, you're not making any sense. And she goes, he's back. We started to see them a couple days ago. They were coming out of the fields. They were walking around. And they said, who? Who are you talking about? He said, all the people that are gone, that have disappeared, that have passed away, that are no longer with us. We've been seeing them, and they're back. They want us to come outside. And the operator responded, no, do not go outside. Stay inside. Like, don't follow these people. We don't know who they are. She goes, no, they want us to come right now. It's time to go. End of transmission. Phone call was over. And then August 17th, there was a 7.5 earthquake that was registered that day. And when some of these sheriffs arrive to this town, they find that the town is completely gone. There's this large fissure that seems to be smoking where the town once existed. And all 670 residents had disappeared. In the Appalachia, there is a particular set of rules that you must follow. You see, people lock their doors and windows at night. They close the curtains. They will not go outside because they know what's out there in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, this story comes out of the Roanoke Valley region of Virginia. There was this family from New York who had lived in the city most of their life. They wanted to get away and, live that remote urban life. So they find this beautiful home on 16 acres in this secluded area of the Roanoke Valley in the Appalachian Mountains. And their first day moving in, the father, right, he notices something weird. The neighbor actually comes not to greet them, not to welcome them to the area, but to warn them. And he says very specifically, at night, make sure you lock your doors and your windows and you close the curtains. And he said, it's very important. There is something out there. And he goes, you mean the people in this area are like really like that you have to lock your doors? And he goes, I'm not talking about people. It's something else. But that's all I'm going to say. Now just remember, lock your doors and your windows at night. You'll be all right. So the neighbor leaves. Well, the father kind of just shakes it off and it's like, okay, whatever. So they live there for several months, and they really enjoy their new life. Well, this one particular night, the family is sitting in the living room and they have a fire going. That's when the father notices that the son is standing next to the window and he's staring at something very intently. And so he asks the son, what are you staring at? What's out there? And he goes, Father, there's a boy out there. Like, there's this young boy. Can I go and play with him? And the father's like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no boy around here. We live in the woods. Like, there's no one around here. And he's like, no, Father, there's a boy out there. There's a boy out there. And the father's like, you know what? It's time for bed. Go to bed. And he doesn't really think anything of it. Over the next couple of weeks, right, the son keeps looking out the window at something and telling his father, there's this boy outside. And he keeps drawing pictures of this boy. And he keeps saying, I really want to play with that boy. The father at the time just thinks, this is something to do with him moving and his active imagination. Until one night, the whole family is asleep. When the father wakes to a sound coming from the living room, he gets his wife up and he's like, I think someone's in the house. I think someone's broken in. Like, go and get the children, make sure they're safe. So he gets up, he goes down the hallway very slowly. And when he gets to the living room and he flips on the light, there's his son on the floor playing with his toys. And the front door is wide open. So he asks his son, like, what are you doing up? Why are you out of bed? And he goes, Father, I'm playing with the boy. And he goes, what boy? What are you talking about? He said, the boy, he came inside and he was playing with me. And his father's like, there is no boy here. Like, there's no one around here that is your age. So he tells his son to go to bed. He goes to the front door and he, peers out. There's no one out there. He closes the door. Well, up until this point, he had been keeping this door unlocked because he felt like, we live in the woods, nothing's going to happen. But that night, he starts locking the door. Well, the next couple of weeks, right, is when they started to hear this banging sound at the front door, like someone was there. And when the father would go and answer the door, there would be no one there. And eventually, the father gets so frustrated and angry with whoever's knocking at the door that one night he hears the knocking. He goes to the front door, he opens it, and, he goes out on the porch and he starts screaming, what are you doing at my house? Like, leave us alone, leave my family alone, like, quit. And all of a sudden, he hears his name being called. And it sounds like a child's voice. And it's telling him to come out into the woods. So this father like kind of makes his way back inside, closes the door and locks it. And at this point, he's like, something is definitely going on. So the next day he goes into town and he goes to the local hardware store and he talks with some of the locals and he starts telling them, I think something's after my family. I think something is trying to like scare us. And the locals say, look, we're not trying to be rude, but you need to take your family and get out of here and move back to town if you know what's best for you. And the father takes this as, oh, they're trying to scare me out of town because I'm from the city. So he goes back home and is like, they're not going to scare us. At this point, though, the family is so terrified that they are all sleeping in the same bedroom. And after a couple nights of them sleeping in the bedroom together, the father wakes up and he sees his son standing next to the window and he's staring at something. And he's like, what are you looking at? Like, what is out there? What is out there? And he goes, they're here. They're here, father. They're here. They're here. And he's like, who's here? And he's like, go back in the bed right now. He goes up to the window, and when he peers out, he sees all of these children standing around the house. And they have these bright, glowing white eyes. So he hurries up, he closes the curtains, and he gets in bed, and he holds his son, and he tells him, go to sleep. The next few days, he's very nervous. He's very on edge, but he doesn't know what to do. That night, he goes to bed with the family in the bedroom. He wakes up, and he discovers his family is all gone. He searches the entire home. They are nowhere. The only thing he finds is that the front door is open. So he figures they've taken his family out into the woods. So he runs as fast as he can out into the woods, and he starts screaming, where's my family? Give me back my family. And all of a sudden, he hears some movement coming through the woods. And out of the shadows steps this young boy. And as this boy takes a couple steps closer, he realizes it's his son. And he has these glowing white eyes. And he looks at his father and he says, not yet. And the father takes off running as fast as he can back to the house. He gets in his car, he drives into town and goes to the local pub. And he starts screaming to them, like, they've got my family, they've taken my family, like, you have to help me. And then he runs out of the bar and he leaves. And that was the last time that they ever seen this man or his family ever again.
Want to start streaming today? Tap the Go Live link below to test it now.
Did you know that psychopaths don't yawn back? I don't know if you've heard that before, but yawning is generally contagious, even between humans and dogs. But not with psychopaths. It's to do with like the lack of empathy. Like the more cold-hearted someone is, then the less likely they are to yawn back. I've been studying psychopathic behaviors for the past year, and sometimes I talk to people who have been diagnosed. I provide a friendly ear, some advice, or just simply a conversation. And they've really helped with my understanding of some topics. I offer to get hot drinks and pay attention to how people take their coffee because, little known fact, psychopaths prefer bitter tastes. So there I was, facing the board, giving my presentation on psychopathy. My hair was immaculately done, my clothes were neatly pressed. I sip my sugary tea and cover my mouth when a yawn carries out through the audience. Small details, but I'm a perfectionist. In conclusion, I'd said with a wide, trustworthy smile, I'm sure you can see that I was misdiagnosed. I am in no danger to myself or others, and the other residents here can also attest to that. I never harmed because I wanted to. I hated every minute. I harmed to fit in with my awful cousins, which is something that I no longer believe is necessary. I am not them. I am a stronger person thanks to you all. And as I left the room so that they can discuss my case, I considered what my first steps would be upon my release. I'm pretty sure I've got the psychiatry board charmed. My parents will be so relieved to hear that I'm all better. My research had paid off, and also they've given me some wonderful ideas. I mean, who better than me to follow in the footsteps of the greats like Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy? But unlike them, I'll be smart enough to evade notice.
Let's step back into the 13th century and explore this haunted chapel.
Here we are at the old Unsworth Chapel in the graveyard of St Andrews in McGull. A skeletal ghost in a hood has been sighted in the chapel through the old windows and sometimes walking through the door.
The chapel in the shadows of St Andrew's Church have been a functional place of worship for over 700 years. The small building is constructed of red sandstone and has early Norman features as well as 19th century alterations. It once served the local farming communities of Maghull, and there's nothing quite like it in the area. It really is a historical gem. That being said, it's not the only reason I'm paying a visit. It also boasts its very own ghostly stories, made infamous by Liverpool author Tom Slemen. Writing in one of his Haunted Liverpool books, he told of a rather ghoulish tale that happened here in the year 2001. Apparently, on a cold autumn night, some unruly local teens gathered within the graveyard of St Andrews to drink alcohol, play music and party. Despite it being a place of eternal rest, they cared not and carried on into the early hours of the morning. That was until one of the members of the group, a young man named Ben, noticed a figure walking through the chapel gate, despite the fact it was locked. Laughing it off in the moment and thinking his eyes must be deceiving him, perhaps it was one of his friends drunk and in costume, he approached the figure, only for it to pull back its hood, revealing a skull smiling back from inside. Many local people believe this to be a guardian-type spirit that looks after the ancient chapel. Well, he sure scared away those drunken teens that night. Perhaps he still haunts the area.
I thought we were hearing a woman drown from a lake until we found out who the little girl was. Friends and I decided to spend the weekend at a cabin, and it was one of my friend's grandfather's cabin. He owned it. It was a really pretty place. It was very isolated. There was lots of trees, and the cabin had a lake that was like a 5-minute walk behind it. The first night we got there, it was great. It was so much fun. We played cards, we had dinner, we made s'mores, and then we all wound up going to bed around midnight. And then around 2 a.m. I woke up and I heard that my name was being called. And it took me until the second time that I heard my name to realize that it was coming from outside. I looked out at the window and it was completely dark. I didn't see anybody out there. And so I just kind of laid back in bed because I didn't want to make a big deal over it. I didn't want to wake any of my friends up over this if it was nothing, right? And then I heard, like a couple minutes later, I heard, "Help me." And so I woke up my friend for that, and we sat there and we just kind of whispered back and forth for a minute, trying to figure out like where it was coming from, like what do we do? Then we heard it say, "Help me" again, and my friend said something that made my stomach drop. She said, that actually sounds like my mom. Her mom lived 3 hours away from here. Like, this could not have been her mom. At that moment, we decided not to go outside because we've heard of like mimics and things like that, and we were so creeped out. We're in the middle of the woods. Eventually we fell back asleep, and then the next morning we woke up and we talked about it. We kind of laughed and joked about it, even though it was still something that was leaving us pretty uneasy. My friend's grandpa called her and he asked how the cabin was, and we told him about the voice that we thought we heard last night. And he got really quiet for a minute, like he was thinking about something, and he said, "What time did you hear the voice?" We told him that it was around 2 a.m. and he said, "Don't go near the lake." And we were just kind of like, "Wait, like, are you being serious right now?" And he said, "Yeah, don't go near the lake. Like, a few years ago, a woman was camping with her young daughter and she drowned in the lake, and so the mother passed away, but the daughter survived." People who have stayed at the cabin, like, occasionally have reported that they hear, like, a woman screaming from the lake, and we were taking seriously what he was saying, but at the same time we're like, yeah, okay, you know what I mean? Until the next night came around, and it was 2 a.m. once again, and I woke up to the most horrific noise of a little girl sobbing, and then I heard a mother's voice coming from the lake saying, "Don't let her get in." And so I woke up from that, and I looked over at my friend, and my friend was already sat up, like she woke up too. Before we could say anything else, we started to hear footsteps outside of the cabin, and I couldn't tell if it was footsteps going towards the lake away from the cabin or if it was kind of circling the cabin. We looked outside of the window, nobody was there, and then we hear like a little jiggle on our cabin doorknob. Both of us just stared silently at the doorknob for felt like forever. It was probably like 10 minutes. We didn't hear it move again, but we did hear like a very faint little girl laugh, and it was the same tone that the little girl was crying before. Anyways, we didn't sleep the rest of that night. We were terrified. Everything that her grandpa said was true. The next morning we started to pack our things and we were going to leave because we were terrified. And as we were leaving, we noticed that there was a set of footprints and we followed it, and it was coming out of the lake towards the cabin. It wasn't just one set of footprints either. This is the part that really gets me. It was like full adult footprint, and then next to it was a child size footprint. If you have a scary story that you want to tell, send it through the link in my bio. After Dark hotline is always open.
The 14th century was the worst century in history. I said what I said. As a historian who is obsessed with the niche and nuanced, who thrives in the most micro-historical back alleyways and obscure archives of our collective past, I usually avoid such broadly sweeping polemical claims. But this is my hill. It's an argument I've been making for years to friends, family, to hostage strangers at dinner parties who didn't know their evenings were about to be ruined by an unsolicited lecture on medieval European calamities. And now I'm forcing this unsolicited lecture on you. The 14th century was the worst century to be alive in European history. Not one of the worst, not among the strongest contenders for the worst, the worst. Some of you might already be jumping into the comments with things like, well, if you look at the 6th century, or have you met the 20th? I hear you. There is absolutely a case to be made for almost every century of recorded history. We can definitely revisit and duke it out, but you're gonna have to hear me out first, because I've been mentally assembling this argument for 2 decades, and I'm ready to deliver my closing statement. The 14th century is perhaps best known for the Black Death, but this century's problems did not begin with the plague. The plague was the midlife crisis of a century that had already been going catastrophically wrong for 40 years. The 14th century began with the onset of what climate historians now call the Little Ice Age. Beginning around 1300, average temperatures across Europe dropped noticeably. Winters lengthened, growing seasons contracted, rainfall patterns became erratic and increasingly punishing. As a result, agricultural yields began to collapse. And in a pre-industrial economy in which most of the population was only one bad harvest away from starvation, this was a true calamity. The first great crisis came between 1315 and 1317 in what we now call the Great Famine. Torrential, unseasonal, and unceasing rain destroyed harvests across most of Northern Europe for 2 consecutive years. Grain reserves ran out. Prices exploded. Millions of people starved to death across England, France, Germany, and the Low Countries. Contemporary accounts describe scenes that read like end-of-the-world horror. Peasants boiled leather from their shoes to eat. Parents abandoned children they could not feed. There are chronicle reports, impossible to verify, but too consistent across regions to entirely dismiss, of cannibalism in the worst affected areas. By the time the rains ended and the harvests recovered, an estimated 10 to 25% of the population of the affected regions had died. Exhibit B, the plague. Referred to by contemporaries as the Great Pestilence, the Black Death arrived in Europe in 1347, carried on Genoese trading ships from the Crimea. Over the next 4 years, it killed an estimated 30 to 60% of the European population. That's a well-known, oft-quoted statistic, but I feel like the true weight of it doesn't always hit home. 30% of the population means 1 in every 3 people you know. Like, mentally line yourself up with your friends and family, then look left and right. One of you is a goner. 60% means 3 out of every 5. For a population that had no scientific framework for understanding what was happening, no effective treatments, no way to slow the spread beyond isolation, and no theological explanation that felt adequate to the scale of what they were watching, I can't even imagine the fear and horror the Black Death must have inspired. Contemporary accounts describe cities where the dead outnumbered the living so severely that bodies were left on the street or buried in mass pits because there were not enough people alive to conduct individual funerals. The Great Pestilence didn't just decimate the population. It shattered the entire underlying framework of medieval European life. The church, which was supposed to be able to make sense of catastrophe, could not explain why God was killing this many people this indiscriminately. The medical profession was exposed as helpless. So severe was the disruption to the existing economic system that, in some regions, the post-plague labor shortage resulted in the complete collapse of manorial serfdom. And it kept coming back. The Black Death was not a single event. The catastrophe that began in 1347 was just the first wave. Subsequent outbreaks in 1361, 1369, 1374, and beyond, often specifically affecting children born after the first wave who had no immunity, kept killing off the recovering population for the rest of the century. By 1400, Europe's population was still, in most regions, dramatically smaller than it had been in 1300. A century of demographic growth, undone in a decade, never fully rebuilt for centuries to come. Exhibit C, the institutions, i.e. the religious, political, military systems that were supposed to be holding all of this together. In any functional society faced with this scale of calamity, you would expect massive institutional mobilization in response. Political institutions to coordinate relief, military institutions to maintain order, religious institutions to provide meaning. Any semblance of authoritative apparatus to reassure the surviving population that someone somewhere was in charge of making sense of and working to address what was happening. The 14th century's institutions were, at the moment when they were most needed, uniquely and fundamentally broken. The Roman Catholic Church, the single most influential institution in medieval Europe, the one that was supposed to explain God's motives and machinations to an anxious and often suffering population, spent most of the 14th century in a state of profound internal crisis. Beginning in 1309, the papacy was moved from Rome to Avignon under French political pressure, where it remained for nearly 70 years in what critics called the Babylonian captivity. When the papacy finally returned to Rome in 1377, the situation immediately got worse, because within a year, a rival pope was elected who refused to recognize the return. And so began the Western Schism. From 1378 onward, 2 popes, and at one point even 3, claimed authority simultaneously, fracturing the already fragile illusion of Christian unity and splitting Europe along lines of allegiance to either Rome or Avignon. The institution that was supposed to provide theological clarity in the wake of the plague couldn't even agree on who was running the show. And it wasn't just the religious institutions that were failing. Europe's 2 most powerful kingdoms, England and France, spent most of the 14th century engaged in what we now know as the 100 Years' War, a sustained, massively destructive conflict that began in 1337 and would continue on and off until 1453. This wasn't a war fought at borders by professional armies. It was a war fought largely on French soil by armies that supported themselves through chevauchée, the deliberate, systematic destruction of civilian populations and infrastructure to weaken the enemy. Entire regions of France were repeatedly devastated. Social systems were destabilized, taxation soared, and agriculture collapsed. And the political leadership of both kingdoms did virtually nothing. 2 focused on besting one another in the war to respond to the needs of their suffering populations. The nobility, the estate whose entire ideological justification for being was to protect the population, to defend society and its institutions, failed so visibly in the wake of the plague and the war that peasant revolts erupted across Europe. The Jacquerie in France in 1358, a massive rural uprising that was brutally suppressed. The English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, led by figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball, who explicitly challenged the theological legitimacy of the entire social hierarchy. These weren't spontaneous outbursts. They were coherent, largely understandable responses of people who had been forced to pay feudal dues to a ruling class that had done nothing as their villages were decimated by plague, burned by roving armies, starved through repeated famines. And the noble classes responded to these uprisings with brutal, merciless violence. Every century experiences its fair share of wars, plagues, famines, political catastrophes. Honestly, if we were to tally up the raw number of terrible events in individual European centuries, the 14th century might not even be an outlier. The 17th century's 30 Years' War was ruinous in ways the 100 Years' War never quite matched. Going by numbers alone, the 20th century killed more people than any pre-modern catastrophe. What makes the 14th century the worst, in my opinion, is that the disasters were simultaneous. They were systemic, and they compounded each other in ways that arguably no other century in European history has matched before or since. The Little Ice Age weakened the agricultural base. The resulting famines killed off populations already teetering dangerously on the margins. The weakened and starving populations were more vulnerable to the plague. The death toll destabilized society while the labor shortage disrupted the economic base further. The economic disruption fueled the peasant uprisings. The peasant uprisings coincided with the 100 Years' War, which prevented the nobility from responding effectively. And the church, which should have provided the interpretive framework for making sense of all this suffering, was so impaired by its own internal fracturing that it was fundamentally incapable of meeting the needs of its flock, spiritually or otherwise. There was literally no domain of medieval European life that was functioning properly. Not the climate, not the food supply, not the health of the population, not the political leadership, not the religious institutions, not the economic structure. All of them were failing, and failing in ways that made the failures of the others worse. The 14th century didn't just witness a particularly unfortunate preponderance of horrors and calamities. It broke the existing order of the medieval world. The church never fully recovered its pre-14th century authority. The Reformation, when it arrived a century and a half later, was largely made possible because the church's credibility had been so irreparably damaged during the schism. The post-plague labor shortage and the peasant revolts that followed so thoroughly disrupted the manorial economic system that by 1400, feudalism as a coherent economic structure was in terminal decline. The intellectual confidence of the High Middle Ages, that specific certainty that Christendom was on the right course, operating according to knowable divine principles, was shattered in ways that ultimately produced both the Renaissance humanism that questioned medieval scholasticism and the Reformation. Everything that followed, every facet that helped build the world we would recognize as modern, only came to be because the 14th century broke the world that preceded it. Other centuries had wars, plagues, political and religious crises. The calamities of the 14th century happened in concord, in mutually reinforcing waves, two societies that had no capacity to effectively respond. That is not a bad century. That is a civilization-shattering century. And that's why my vote for the worst century to be alive in European history is and will always be the 14th. Now, maybe I'm biased because the 14th century falls within my period of concentration and I've just had more exposure to its particular horrors. And obviously I'm only honing in on Europe, so other parts of the world may have seen some epically bad centuries that haven't made it onto my radar. But if you disagree, drop your votes for worst century to be alive in the comments.
Let's read a true, scary story. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a plushie and get cozy. This happened when I was about 27 years old, and I still remember it as if it happened yesterday. It was a winter's night around 3 a.m., and I was sleeping in my room when I felt my mother had come in to wake me up. I was awake enough to understand what was happening, but didn't want to get up. I kept pulling the blanket over my head and told her, I don't want to wake up. She tried to pull the blanket away 3 times, and I resisted every time. While this was happening, I suddenly realized something very important. The door to my room was locked from the inside with a key. I always slept with the door locked. It was impossible for my mother to have entered the room. The moment I realized that, I decided to look at her. I lifted the blanket. The body and clothes looked exactly like my mother, but the face was not hers. Her face was completely black, and her hair was white and messy. In real life, my mother has fair skin, and her hair looks nothing like that. The strange part is that she never tried to hurt me. She didn't say anything scary. She only kept trying to wake me up. I was afraid, but I stayed surprisingly calm. I pretended to be asleep again, pulled the blanket over my head, and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I did was check the door. It was still locked from the inside, exactly as I expected. No one could have entered my room that night. Nothing unusual happened that day, and this experience has never happened again. To this day, I still don't know how to explain it. Was it just a realistic dream, a sleep-related experience, or something else?
Want to hear something scary? This is part 4 of my followers' scary stories. The commenters' names will be on the screen. This story happened years ago. On this day, me and my friends were bored as hell. It was morning, about a half an hour before the doors of our school opened, and I just remember it being really cold outside. So to counteract this, we decided to sit inside an unlocked area of our school's gym. At the time, the game Charlie Charlie was popular, so we already knew the rules, and out of boredom, we decided to play it together. We set up the game, drew the lines, wrote the S's and No's, and set up the pencils. Charlie Charlie, do you want to play? After we asked this, there was a brief pause before the pencil spun to yes. However, we were all skeptical. The door to the gym was closed tightly, but we forcibly convinced ourselves that it was the wind. So in order to check the game's legitimacy, one of my friends asked another question. It was something stupid like, are you behind me? But this time the pencils didn't move. This just ensured us further that the first one was a fluke or the wind. One of my friends asked, are you friendly? This is the point in the story it begins to go downhill, because the pencils spun to no. We continued playing, but the longer we played, the more uncomfortable we got, and eventually I asked to end the game. The pencil spun to no. I tried again. No. Again. No. So we were forced to keep going. Once it was my turn, I asked, are you going to hurt me? The pencil whipped to yes. The second this happened, a severe pain exploded up my back. I cried out and told my friends what had happened. We tried to end the game again, and thankfully this time we got a yes. Even after ending it, my back was still in severe pain, and so I had one of them pull up my shirt to check if there was any damage, and was told I had a long set of aggravated scratch marks that thankfully weren't actively bleeding, but were very red and very painful. The moral here, do not tempt spirits, and do not play this game. I've heard a lot of scary Charlie stories. This one stood out to me when I was reading it. I liked this story a lot. I'm sorry you had scratches. Charlie's getting a little kinky. I'm sorry, I'll stop. When I was 9, me and my sister and 2 of her friends were hanging out and decided that we were going to try playing Baby Blue. There were 4 of us, so we all went in the bathroom at the same time. As we were chanting Baby Blue, 13 times, my sister felt something pull her hair. She screamed, and we ran out of the room, but in the chaos, one of my sister's friends accidentally got left in the bathroom. When we realized, we tried to open the door, but we couldn't. It was like it was being held shut. We could hear her screaming and banging on it from the inside, and when the door finally opened, my sister's friend had scratches all up and down her back. We were all terrified and ran upstairs to my sister's room and stayed there all night, not moving until the sun began to rise. Spooky. I don't hear a lot of Baby Blue stories. I think this might be one of the only ones. This story takes place a few years ago, during school. Nothing interesting had happened that day. I had class like normal, and then lunch, and then was getting ready for the school day to finally end. The teacher was droning on about some equation we were supposed to have memorized for the next test, and so I zoned out, not paying much attention. However, a few minutes into me daydreaming, I began to hear voices. 3 distinct voices that no one else seemed to notice. I looked everywhere to try to find the source of the voices, but couldn't find anything. That's when I glanced behind the piano. This part of the piano was almost against the wall, just leaving a slim crack of darkness, and when I gazed into said darkness, I saw an eye gazing back. I asked the teacher if we can look around the piano when finished, and she said yes. However, when we went to look, nothing was there, so I just went back to doing what I was doing beforehand and tried to forget about it. However, the voices got more and more persistent and began quietly chanting my name. Once again, I seemed to be the only one who could hear it and began to get really afraid. I had thought my friends were playing a trick on me, and so I asked them to stop, but they just seemed confused and told me they didn't say anything. A couple of days later, it happened again, and this time I inspected around the piano more closely and found a hidden door behind the piano. I found this odd and knew there was something paranormal going on, so I went to ask one of my friends that I knew had a very spiritual connection with the afterlife, and she said that she's had contact with ghosts before. She told me that there was a little girl who looked just like me, and that little girl kept telling her to tell me that I needed to get out of here. I got scared and I said that's not true. I was wrong. A few days later, I was playing volleyball in the gym with my friends and I fell down. The memory is foggy after that, but when I came back to, my friends told me that I began manically chasing them and they thought I was possessed. I apparently grabbed one of my friend's arms and bit them hard enough to draw blood. However, they didn't tell on me because they knew something was wrong and it didn't seem like me. Over the following days, I continued to hear the voices calling my name. I have to walk through the woods to get back home after school, which never was a problem before. However, since these experiences, it felt different, like I was being watched. I knew I was maybe being paranoid, but one day when I was walking through the woods, panic finally gripped me, and I began to run. I ran as hard as I could through the brush and kept looking back, trying to see if I could spot anyone coming after me. I logically knew no one should be there, but on the second time I looked back, I saw a vague figure of what looked to be a young girl running after me. She had brown hair, the same chocolate shade as mine, her outfit adorned in the same colors and patterns as the ones I felt scratching my skin currently as I ran. It felt like hours, but it was likely only 10 seconds. I busted through the tree line, spotting my house in the distance, and whipped around to see if she was still following me, but nothing was there anymore. Just the rustling of branches and the falling of leaves as the blue summer sky began to turn to a burning amber. I stared into the woods for a moment longer before I slowly made my way back home. I didn't see her again after that. I don't want to say I don't believe this one, but I'm skeptical. I like the story though. I do like the story.
Elizabeth Jean Williams was born on August 11, 1943, but people knew her as Betty. In 1961, she was a high school student at the Odessa High School in Texas. Now, she wasn't your typical girl in the 1960s. She liked things that were considered counterculture, and she was also known to be, I hate to say this, but easy on a date. Unfortunately, she was not a popular girl. But she dated this guy named John Mag Herring. Now, he was the exact opposite of her. He was a football star, he was popular, like everyone really liked this kid, and they thought he had his entire future ahead of him. Well, John and Betty would eventually break up, and Betty did not take this well. She allegedly told many of her peers that she didn't want to be alive anymore, and she even went as far as asking them if they would take her life, but all of them thought that this was a joke. On March 22nd of 1961, Betty's mom called police saying that her daughter had not returned home from rehearsals. She was a part of a play, as was John. They were both part of this play, and she never came back from rehearsals. Police started investigating, and that's when they found out all about Betty's reputation. And they also found out that she was incredibly sad about this breakup with John Mark and that she had been asking her friends to take her life. They also found out that Betty had been on a date with another guy that night, and this guy said that when he dropped Betty off at her home, he had seen John's car parked in the alleyway before he left. This was enough to bring John in for questioning, and within 45 minutes, he told police exactly what had happened. He said that Betty had asked him to take her life multiple times, and finally he decided to do it. So, after rehearsals that day, he had gone to his house to get his car, a shotgun, and rope and some weights. He then picked Betty up, and they drove to some lease ground they had 25 miles north of Odessa. He said that he picked her up around midnight and that Betty was in good spirits because she said that she knew she would be in heaven soon. John said that when they got to the lake, Betty asked him for a goodbye kiss, which he gave her. She then said that I will remember that forever, and then he took the shotgun, put it to her head, and then pulled the trigger. He then tied the ropes around her waist, walked her to the middle of the lake, and then just let go. John took investigators to the lake and walked to the area where he had let Betty go, and he brought her back to shore. She was nearly decapitated. Now, you would think that this case would be cut and dry, that John did it, he's going to prison, right? But his lawyer started with an insanity plea, saying that John was insane during the time that he committed this crime and no time else. Like, he's completely sane except for the time that he pulled the trigger. Now, during the trial, they did bring out a note that was allegedly written by Betty saying that she took the blame for this and no one else should have any consequences for what had happened. They also brought friends and family and even a psychiatrist to attest to the fact that John was mentally ill during the time that this happened. Not mentally ill, but insane. The jury believed this and he was set free, but the Texas Supreme Court disagreed and reversed this decision and another trial was set. This time, John was acquitted. John went on to live a very normal life. He became an electrician and lived out his life until he passed away in 2019. He stayed in Odessa the whole time, and he was 75 years old when he passed away. But personally, all I can think about is Betty Jean and what happened to her that night, and if this is actually something she did want to happen, or if her life was taken from her. I don't know. I have a really hard time with this case, especially for him to claim that he was insane only during the time that he committed this crime. Seems awful. But what are your thoughts on this? Let me know down in the comments and follow for more true crime.
Okay, this one's kind of a long one. It's a true story and it's ongoing, and there are kids in the middle of this one, and these folks could really use some help. So without further ado, I've always been skeptical of ghosts, demons, and things that go bump in the night. But tonight I had something happen that I can't explain, and it's been bothering me ever since. And I apologize in advance for being long-winded. I guess everything started slowly, about 4 years ago, with my youngest son saying he saw someone in our bathroom that called themselves Mr. Peeps. We chalked it up to an act of imagination, but over time, the activity has snowballed and become much more intense. My at-the-time wife befriended someone from work who, on her very first time coming over to our house, said that she felt a strong, dark energy there and subsequently tried to drive it out. All went well for a couple of years, then everything really started. Sightings became more and more frequent. I nearly passed away. My then wife and I began fighting constantly and ended up divorcing. And my oldest son went to the shed with the intention of never coming out. Thankfully, he abandoned those plans. We live in Ohio, south of Cleveland. I wasn't here when she did it. I think she burned sage and said a prayer. We have chained the door shut because they kept opening and closing. During one of the times I was in the hospital, a friend that had come to take care of my pets for me said as they pulled into the yard, lights turned on in the living room, the blinds opened, and then the light shut off again. Over the last couple of months, there has been banging on my garage door every night. 3 weeks ago, my oldest son was hearing screaming coming from the attic. He called me at work, and I heard it too. He says whenever he looks towards the shed, he feels like he's being watched. And tonight, one of our cats escaped the house and ran into the backyard. When I went out searching for the cat, it was 10:30 p.m. I found him in the corner of the shed, hissing and growling, but nothing there. As I picked him up, my flashlight beam showed my breath. It was 72 degrees outside. I felt the heaviness, like when you walk into a room right after there's been a big argument. Now I'm sitting here, still feeling like I'm being stared down from outside, and have heard things falling in 2 separate closed rooms with nobody in them. Again, I don't normally believe in stuff like this, but everything that has happened has started to make me a believer. Update. It is currently 6:27 a.m. I haven't been able to sleep yet and have left my house. All night I've strongly felt like I've been watched. At around 3:30 a.m., the door to my garage rattled like someone pounding on it. This has been an ongoing issue for the others in the house. While talking to my ex-wife, who is out of town with the boys, she informed me that our youngest son has also seen a disembodied head in the shed and in the back seat of both of our cars. Once a friend of ours said she saw something that looked like my ex standing on the stairs when she was sound asleep in our bedroom right next to me. Right before I left the house, I heard something hit my door, like a dog or cat fell against it. Only there was nothing there when I opened the door. Also, when I left, the blinds in my youngest son's window opened, like someone was watching me leave. Then, while on the phone with my ex, our oldest son called through because he is with his grandparents and woke up from a nightmare, as we were discussing it all on the phone. This was the first I have heard about him seeing these, and also discovered from her, our oldest son brought back an occult book about conjuring last summer, Creating Magical Entities, a complete guide to entity creation, that depicts a spirit being conjured in a circle of salt for the cover art when he went to visit Nantucket. I'm going to look for it at home and see if he has scribbled any notes in it. And during the course of our call with him, he was drawing. And I feel like whatever is going on in my house has attached itself to him. We think that he may have accidentally conjured a demon in our house. Come to find out, he had this book in his room. And the friend of ours that is into mysticism feels that our oldest son may have accidentally conjured a demon. We're supposed to get the house blessed on Sunday. My ex and I were foster parents for a while, and part of that is requiring we have working smoke and carbon monoxide detectors throughout the house, so I know we can rule that out. Earlier today, I went back to my shed and smelled decay that disappeared when I opened the door. And on the door itself were carvings, one of a person, others were words and other things I couldn't make out. There is something that just flooded my memory, something else that happened with my youngest. There have been a couple of times that he has said he heard his mom's voice calling to him from the attic, but I always chalked it off as his vivid imagination. Saying there has been a lot of misery over the last few years would be an understatement. 4 years ago as well, my wife and I went through a 5-week stretch living out of suitcases. My uncle passed away right before our family vacation. We went on a pre-planned and paid vacation. The day after we got home, my mom passed. About a week after, my uncle, her brother, and my wife's grandfather, all within a span of 3 weeks. Also, since November, our dog Max broke a brand new collar and was hit by a car. And one of our other cats, who was perfectly healthy, walked across the living room and just fell over, limp and lifeless. Don't even get me started on my life before my ex-wife and I met and got married. Let's say my life can be summed up as a magnet for misery. My house did have a history, but mostly as a party house before I bought it. A couple of years ago, a neighbor physically assaulted his girlfriend on his front porch on New Year's, and sadly, she was lost in the incident. Otherwise, it's just a boring cul-de-sac of tri-level houses built in the 70s. About as run-of-the-mill as you can get. I was still skeptical until tonight. Other people have experienced it, but never myself. But with nobody except me in the house, I think it made me its target. Everything towards the end here has happened tonight, since 10:30 last night. What the hell am I dealing with exactly? Wow, that is a whole lot to unpack, but I'm very concerned just about the kids in the house and the fact that book, I saw the cover of it. There is a spirit coming out of a spirit circle. It's like a how-to guide to conjure things. It's not something you want to just walk into blindly and start, practicing spells in your bedroom. Anyway, I wouldn't advise it. But thank you for that story tonight. Like I said, I'm going to keep the submitter anonymous because of the kids involved. It's sensitive. But keep sending me those stories and suggestions. That's been Jay's Haunted Appalachia for tonight. Keep Appalachia haunted, y'all.
Bro, what's going on around